would you characterize your work with women in your practice? So I can do a little introduction of that as well.
That's a great question. It feels a lot more like what I am is a doula of the female body and the female intuition. That's a lot of the work that I end up doing, because I end up helping support women to drop into their own body and be able to stand in autonomy and authority of who they were designed and created to be, and their own sovereignty, and to ask better questions of their medical professionals. And though I also help support them from a supplemental level, I also don't ever want to play God in a woman's story and really trust her own intuition that begins to come online as she starts nourishing herself more.
So that's incredible.
Welcome to the To Flourish podcast, where we sit down and have conversations around all things fertility, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. From trying to conceive to that little babe nestled in your arms, my hope is that you walk away from today's episode feeling empowered, confident, and encouraged to flourish in this season.
Welcome back to the To Flourish podcast. I'm so excited to welcome you to today's episode. I have with me here in my living room, Parris Hodges. We are going to be sitting down today and chatting about the female body, about specifically our menstrual cycle. And I am specifically so excited to talk to Parris about it because she has a practice. She does work with women, really just helping women get in tune with their bodies. And I mean, we're going to get into this and she can share it better than I can. But all that to say, excited to dive in. So Parris, I would love to begin if you could give us a little introduction about who you are and a little bit of your story and how you got into this realm, this field with working with women.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Julia. It is a joy and a pleasure to be here with you, to be talking about this all. I'm a mother. I am a daughter. I am a holy daughter. And that knowing is what I bring forward in the work that I do. I educate women about their miraculously created bodies and the way that we were originally designed to function as women. I like to do all of my work from an educational level. And then I've also been trained through the root cause protocol to help support women in rebalancing their hormones from the mineral level. And that's both of those two things walk hand in hand. But all of my work always starts from an educational level, because my hope is always to bring forward a woman's intuition and sovereignty and authority over who she was designed to be, and allowing that to become the North Star in the process. And it's just just adding little tiny adjustments here or there so that she can come back online to who it was that she was designed to be. And I love what I get to do, because I watch women really come forward in themselves.
Yeah, that's incredible. I feel like in my own journey of specifically when I was pregnant with my son, I feel like I've always been a more intuitive person, feeling, whether or not to do something, but not necessarily knowing the why behind it. And so when I was pregnant, I knew I wanted to do home birth, no interventions and just navigating all of those sorts of things. But it was as I was diving into resources and educating myself on, okay, what is the physiology of my body, is informing the intuition that I had, and then just propelling me to even greater trust of my body and how it's designed, and then my babies. So I just think that is so powerful, the work that you do with women, because it's an invitation for us to step into who we are in our design.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to hear a little bit of your origin of how specifically you got into this line of work.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, in my experience so far, most women in the Western world are never educated about how we were designed to be, just like you experienced too, right? Like it's once we step forward through these major thresholds that it's suddenly like, oh, by the way, this is how this works.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we are told throughout our life is that fertility also is a destination that you'll get to eventually. Something, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Not that it's literally like how fruitful you are, how much life is coursing through your veins and your bones. And I existed in that system, right? Like I grew up incredibly disconnected from my body. And from the time that I was in elementary school, when we first learn about puberty, and I was handed an American Girl's like How Your Body Works book, as well as like went through all of the tapes. But a lot of what I have experienced is that most young girls are informed about this event, this event that happens every month, maybe.
Yeah.
And that it is something shameful, pretty gross. You should hide it away. I mean, we see this with menstrual products that are on the shelves and stuff. They're scented. It's all about like how to get that event to work for your life, right? Like and I was a young athlete too. And so there was even more communicated either verbally or non-verbally in that process around you don't want your period to impact what else is happening in your life rather than the other way around, right? Like teaching and educating around how to exist around the most important part of the cycle outside of ovulation.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I never knew how to interpret what was happening inside of my body. And so I existed with really dysfunctional menstrual cycles from the time that I started having them. And all of the young girls around me were all going on birth control. And I was really, really fortunate that I had some deep intuition and that fell out of my mouth that I couldn't even handle my real hormones. I didn't want to see what my body would do on synthetic hormones.
Oh my goodness. How old were you?
I was in high school.
High school? Okay.
Yeah.
That's so amazing.
I was also a pretty late bloomer too. And so like, although I wanted to go on birth control because all of the guys all of the girls would also always talk about how they would get really big boobs while they were on it. And so I would like flirt with the idea, but I'm so grateful that there was like some hand of God in that was like really protecting me.
Yeah.
Cause that really was divine protection.
Yeah.
And fast forward, I, again, just experience debilitating menstrual cycles. And during those younger puberty years is when I entered into a relationship with bulimia, which also began right after I walked into puberty, which I have like deeper like thoughts and feelings and interpretations around now of how that was like, this cycle that was screaming for more help and support. It was another way that my body was, expressing that. we fast forward to when I was 22 and engaged. I experienced my first miscarriage, which that catapulted me through the next doorway of asking more questions of the allopathic medical system and going like, what else is going on here? And I was given a autoimmune diagnosis during that time too.
Wow.
And that started the process of really pulling the thread. And it feels like that the moments where like the hand of God starts like pulling you forward. And what unfolds in the years forward is, again, continuing to have debilitating menstrual cycles without any kind of answers. And my body's just, I'm super fatigued all the time.
Yeah.
I'm also incredibly bloated all the time. And most of what I was receiving from the medical system was that these were all events that didn't coexist together.
Interesting.
Which is fascinating because it's like, wait a second, I'm in a body that exists completely together.
Yes. Yeah.
How do these things not fit? And it was in 2012. It was April 2012 that I was going through a whole slew of medical issues and was given a laundry list of possible diagnoses. And at some point in time, they informed me, you have endometriosis, and you have it to such a degree, you'll likely never be able to conceive. I'm 25 at this point in time too. And they tell me that my two options are a hysterectomy or to go on hormonal birth control. And it was like, it was earth shattering for me at that point in time, because all I wanted was to be a mom. And then a couple months later, I ended up pregnant, unplanned.
Oh, wow.
Which, you know, just really speaks to also the level of disconnection that I had to my body and how the sacred vessel that my body was, much less the way that it beautifully communicates with us to inform us where it is in the cycle. Like, all I really knew was the rhythm method, and it was a really sloppy version of the rhythm method of like, look up and the rhythm method is all based off of the first day of your last period. And then it guesses roughly where you might ovulate and where your fertile window would be. And lo and behold, here I am pregnant. And I was like, wait a second. Somebody might be missing something here. And that, stepping into becoming a mother began to, again, pull the veil back even more around what else am I not being told? What else do I not yet know about the way that the female body functions? And motherhood initiated me to an even greater degree, where I started to ask even more questions, right? Just like you were saying, like you start studying, and then it's like, wait a second. I've been existing inside of this. It's like sitting inside of a car, like a really nice car. And then you finally get to your destination. And then it's like, maybe we should pull out the handbook. Like it just doesn't really make sense, but that's how our society is set up. And profit model, associated with that aside, it's, it creates so much disconnection and victim orientation within who we are. We fast forward a couple years after giving birth, and the birthing process in and of itself began to lead me to ask more questions too. Like, here I was in giving birth in the hospital, and they're guessing like how much the baby's going to weigh. And I'm laying on the table, and they're like 6 pounds, 8 ounces. And lo and behold, he's 8 pounds, 7 ounces.
Oh my goodness.
And that was a big pivotal moment of me going, this is all smoke and mirrors. And that that hunger and desire within myself that had been initiated to start asking bigger questions and to seek more knowledge around how I was designed really got kickstarted through that all.
Yeah.
And then it was it was in the postpartum period of time when I started to experience cognitive decline to such a degree. And this is a year and a half postpartum, mind you. I was in a customer facing role at that point in time, and I was sitting with a customer in front of me, and all of a sudden I forgot where I was. I couldn't even remember the word "and." Like simple words. And I just like, everything was gone.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, what is happening? And all the doctors would tell me was like, it's just pregnancy brain. I was like, a year and a half postpartum, and nobody had answers.
Yeah.
And so again, it initiated.
This doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. This doesn't make sense. Like that could be that was my life. This doesn't make sense. And so I, again, that hunger, the hunger that just propelled me forward to ask more questions.
Yeah.
And then again, the debilitating menstrual cycles came back. And 28 years old, I'm again offered a hysterectomy. They're like, well, you already have one kid.
Wow.
I was like,
Oh my goodness.
it's like, no, I want to have more.
Yeah.
And I wasn't yet ready. I started asking more questions, but God had bigger plans for that journey. And so we fast forward the story to 2019. Again, I'm so disconnected from my body, living in a incredibly chaotic world that to me, with everything around me, I thought was normal. It was not normal at all. It was like very promiscuous and very like, that feminine, like, the feminist movement gone wrong, right? That really disconnected women even more from who we were designed, like originally designed to be. And 2019, I am given a diagnosis of cervical cancer.
Wow.
And again, offered a hysterectomy. Go through a procedure that, and I also like didn't know how to ask more questions around that. I mean, the C word is like such a big one. It's big and scary. We've martyred that word in our culture too. And it's like when you have a doctor that you trust, they've gone to school, they're in a white coat.
Yeah.
We've set up this entire monotheistic system that is very myopic, and it's like there's no other options.
Yeah.
You're going to die if you don't do what we tell you to do.
Yep.
And so I listened initially, and then by the grace of God, walked through what ends up becoming my rock bottom. And I am given the gift of desperation in such a way that I walk into recovery and begin to come into deeper relationship with God, and then begin to like actually have the door open to my body. And it was again from a place of desperation that at this point in time, I'm still experiencing debilitating menstrual cycles. This is right before the pandemic. And because of where I was in my recovery, I had like no funds either. And it was really expensive to buy tampons all the time, especially for the amount of blood loss that I was experiencing. And so I started working with different coaches, and they were all women, and they were like, yeah, you need to use, what were they? Discs. And then it was around the time that menstrual cups had become popular.
Yeah.
So I finally invested in my first menstrual cup, and I'm beginning to like build this relationship with my body in a different way. Then the world shuts down. My body begins to shut down even more. And then I hear this interview with a woman named Jasmine Rose, and she speaks about the wisdom of menstrual blood as well as the menstrual cycle. And she's naming all of the phases of the cycle. And I'm like, how do I not know this information?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it felt like listening to Greek at that point in time.
Yeah.
And here I was, my favorite subjects in college were anatomy and physiology. And I like couldn't recall ever learning about the follicular phase, much less like exactly how ovulation occurs or what the luteal phase was, much less what progesterone was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I knew that endometriosis had a relationship to estrogen, but I couldn't tell you exactly how. And here I was at that point in time, I was 33 years old.
Wow.
33 years of my life existed without any kind of relationship to how I was designed to exist as a woman.
Yeah.
And it was really, I could feel that part of myself that though I didn't know the words was like, I need to know this. There's something here for me.
Yeah.
And so I jumped into it and then it was like the doors flung open. It led me down this bigger path that became my greater awakening. And also like my prodigal journey back to Christ too, that eventually came like through that process of beginning to understand how divinely created I was. And then it was March of 2021, I had begun to really study a lot of this because it was like, I'm not the type of person that you like just give a little bit of information to. It's like, just start pulling that thread. And because I was still experiencing cognitive decline and debilitating menstrual cycles, and I felt terrible. And I, for the first time in my life, was having huge anxiety attacks and just wanted to live. I really wanted to live and I didn't know how.
Yeah.
And that is such it's an unfortunate place to exist. And unfortunately, like, we're never taught this information. And yet there's so many women in the world that want to live and they don't know how.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I feel like my story it's just like that. It's like I didn't so disconnected from my body, and I feel like growing up, I didn't have super bad menstrual cycles or anything like that. But even with that, it was just something that just happened and didn't really, other than the bleeding, it wasn't something that affected my life or anything. When I got engaged to my husband and we were getting married, I was starting to think of, okay, how am I going to prevent pregnancy or things like that? And I'm like so grateful that I have a friend who just held wisdom in this area that I didn't, but I was considering like all the things like, should I do birth control? Should I do, what else is out there? And my friend, she did natural family planning, NFP. And so she like walked me through all of what she was doing, and basically just was such an encouragement of like, don't do birth control. Like, here's all the information about it that nobody tells you about it. But aside from that, so once I decided, I was like, okay, I want to go the natural route. Like I want to tune into my cycle, how this invites me to. But even then, as I was preparing to get married, I did not know that I thought you could get pregnant anytime. I didn't know it was only a small window of time that you can get pregnant. And that was like earth shattering to me of, wait a second, how did I not know that? And even so, as I sit here right now, I'm like, I feel like there's still so much that I don't know about the menstrual cycle, which is why I'm so excited to sit and talk with you. But knowing that my story and your story is not isolated, it is common. It is the common story for women in our culture. And so thank you for sharing all that you did and your journey so far.
I'll say too,
something.
like, not only is it common, but it's pedestalized
Yes.
in many ways, right? Like there is a profit model to this all. There's a lot of people that make a lot of money off of how little that we are educated around our body. And, you know, even if it's like done with the purest of intentions, you know, maybe like, cause there's two sides of this coin, right? Like purity, like major purity culture that like hides the body in every single way. And then you have like over dependence of Western medicine as God too, that like, again, like you're a victim of every single thing that happens in your body. Everything is an isolated event.
Yeah.
And so it like perpetuates this like lack of greater knowledge. And many of us don't work with like doulas or something until we go through the birthing process.
Yeah.
When realistically, like we don't sit amongst women anymore and discuss this stuff. And I have had conversations with elders, like women in their 70s who sit and are like, I mean, I was in a prolapse. Like these women are expressing it, that they were in a prolapse for years.
Wow.
And they didn't feel comfortable ever talking about it with their friends.
Oh,
and
it's heartbreaking.
It really is, because we've become so disconnected from our communal nature. And as women, you know, supporting and educating, like you had the brilliant friend who had gone through that entire process of learning about natural family planning, which really truly is information that we should be given as young girls,
absolutely,
long before we get to the point of
needing
of planning a family.
Yes.
Because it is the connection to watching the heavens unfold inside of our body.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. I think about, like you mentioned, getting the American Girl magazine, right? That showed you. And I had a very similar experience with my mom, where she got me a book and it was just your changing body and what to expect. But yeah, like in our culture, this wisdom has been lost over the span of generations. Yeah, and it's incredibly sad, but I'm so excited today to dive in, and would love, so keeping in mind the context, right, that like so many women are without this knowledge, without this wisdom. I would love if you could just define what the menstrual cycle is and what is its purpose in our body.
Yeah. So the menstrual cycle in particular is discussing what is occurring in the uterine lining. And then we also have an ovarian cycle, but the two of them come together. And a menstrual cycle, technically, by definition, is a loss, like the releasing of the uterine lining that occurs after an ovulation.
Okay.
And so that, by definition, like becomes even more technical for what a woman really needs to understand about how she was designed and created to know if what she's experiencing is truly a menstrual cycle. And the point of the menstrual cycle does have a design for us to procreate as women, right? Like we were told to go out and multiply. And that is how we are designed to be fruitful, because our bodies can only do one of two things. It's either we are designed for just pure survival, or we are designed to multiply. And knowing those two things are really important, because if there's some dysfunction happening on a cycle level, then it points to the opportunity for deeper exploration. And I'll also add in there too that the menstrual cycle is roughly 28 to 30 day cycle that happens within a woman's body. And everyone has their own slight variations dependent upon who they are and their own, I mean, it's like your fingerprint per se. And so having a deeper understanding of what's happening to your own individual design is really important also, so that you can speak up when there is a variance from your particular like normal also.
Yeah. That's so good being aware of that. So you mentioned this, the idea of like survival and then like creating life. I'm curious. So having different symptoms within your cycle, like maybe heavy bleeding or bloating, cramps, like all of that, would that be a sign of your body's in survival mode?
Oh yeah. One of my favorite facts is that inside of every egg, and your eggs exist, like your follicles mature and maturate, and that then create and end up releasing, or maturing the egg and then releasing it out to hopefully be fertilized. But that process inside of each one of those eggs, it's between 100,000 and 500,000 mitochondria. So that is the amount of energy that is needed in order for that to occur, or for that to even exist. And to put this into like, to break this down a little bit more of like, well, okay, those are just obscure numbers. In a normal like body cell, there are 5,000, no, sorry. I think it's 500. It's between 500 or it's 5,000. And I can give the correct information. It's in my phone. I think it's 500 mitochondria. So we're talking, there's a substantial amount of energy that is needed just for an egg to be able to like exist.
Yeah.
And that's not even talking about like all of the processes that lead up to it, because it takes between 90 and 100 days for a follicle to mature to that egg to even then be released also. So you're talking about like a 3-month period, approximately 3-month period of time. It's a really slow journey for that to even occur. So if you think about, going back to your question around the survival or like fertile ability to create life, any of those signs is your body's pulling energy away because it doesn't feel safe to be able to create life. Because in order for the endogenous stress that a woman experiences in the creation of a child is equivalent to climbing Mount Everest. So if you don't even have enough energy to get through your day, then your body's going to be like, nope, I cannot create a human.
Which is like the beauty and like the powerfulness of being in tune with your cycle, or like you being connected to, right? Instead of I'm experiencing this thing, I'm a victim to it, but maybe I'm experiencing this. What is it telling me? I feel like, it's a good insight. Very good insight. What are each phase of the menstrual cycle, and how does our body communicate in each phase?
Great question. So there are 4 phases. They are distinct and different. However, they are woven together. It's not like there's a line of demarcation where it's like all of a sudden you're like, whoop, okay, I'm here. It's subtle. There is a subtle unfolding, almost like it's part of a weaving into a great tapestry of your life. And so where I like to begin first will be, so we have the menstrual phase, which is approximately day 1 to 5 or 7. And that is when you are bleeding and then coming out towards your follicular phase. Part of what's happening during that menstrual phase, I like to reflect it to the seasons of our external seasons of the world. And we refer to that as the inner winter. It is the time of hibernation. And what's occurring on a physiological level is that all of your hormones have dropped to allow for the releasing of your uterine lining in the case that, life was not created and is now being incubated and, brought forward. And then what is happening too is that your hypothalamus begins to signal, and that process happens a little bit before in the previous luteal phase, but for sake of just speaking here, your hypothalamus is communicating with the pituitary gland to send down follicle stimulating hormone, which is FSH, down to the ovary to say, hey, start, maturing. It's time to grow up type of thing. And like, we're getting ready to party. And again, that process takes 90 to 100 days. Yeah. And then what is occurring shortly thereafter, so we go through the bleed and release, and then we come into the follicular phase, which is the time that the Western world really pedestalizes and loves, because it is when you get that boost of energy. As a woman, you come out, you're coming towards spring, and we love springtime, right? We came through winter, it's cold and rainy, and now we get to experience new life, new possibility that's going to occur. And so we, as women, get that flood of new energy, and we get so many different ideas of things that we want to do because, we just walked through our winter and all of the things that we were too tired to get to. And so we want to move forward. And we are far more externally facing during that period of time. What's happening then is, because of the FSH communicating with the ovary, you have estrogen that is being signaled out from the follicle as well, and beginning to build the endometrium lining inside of the uterus. My really brilliant Justice, I did the Justice method. That's where I was educated from. There's also a really great book called Taking Charge of Your Fertility, or Taking Control of Your Fertility. Highly recommend it for women. But my brilliant teacher, Chloe Skurlak, would always explain it as though there's like a party that's about to happen inside of your uterus. And so estrogen's like the party planner. And so she's like putting all of the things inside of the uterus and getting everything ready and prepared, because estrogen is proliferative, which means that it is building.
Okay.
And so that's what's happening there. Then we begin from physiological standpoint, as we start to get closer to that midpoint, which is approximately day 14, when ovulation would be occurring. Our hypothalamus then begins communicating with our pituitary gland to signal luteinizing hormone to release. You also have, in the backstage orchestra, testosterone is beginning to rise inside of the female body too, which drives our libido up also. So I love the allegory. I don't have it necessarily proven anywhere per se, because when you look for this information on the internet, it doesn't exist in the way that I feel as though it exists inside of the body. But you have this dance of the masculine and feminine energies that meet in that divine point of ovulation, when potentiality of life is going to come forward. And I do believe that there is a bigger push of testosterone than we really truly acknowledge as a society, which is a much bigger conversation on the demasculizing and anyways.
Yeah.
So we have that occurs, and then the follicle releases the egg, and the egg will exist for 12 hours in hopes that it gets fertilized. And then what starts to happen is that place on the ovary where the follicle just was becomes a proxy dispensary of more hormone. And it releases a hormone called progesterone. And that is actually our body's it's our natural Xanax. It's an incredibly powerful hormone that we don't discuss near enough, that we need to balance everything. It helps incubate the body. It helps allow for the metabolism to rise, because also what's happening on like back layers inside of the system is that our temperature rises up, which is why tracking our basal body temperature helps us to come into deeper relationship with knowing, do we have enough progesterone that's actually being created? Is our temperature rising? Is our thyroid working appropriately? Is our liver working appropriately? How is everything, coming together?
Yeah.
And so so we go from ovulation, which is like our inner summer, right? And also to what's happening on an external physiological standpoint. In your follicular phase is going to be the time when a woman will actually be her thinnest. And then in ovulation, she will round out more and be more appealing to the opposite sex. And you will actually become more symmetrical in your face. And then, your breast size will increase. Your hips will also start to like increase a bit too. And for me as a woman who, with the relationship with the eating disorder, learning that started to help me land inside of my body where I wasn't like fighting against it so much. Then the luteal phase is equivalent to the external season of autumn. It's that time of like harvest. It's also can be a little bit more of that like gathering and coming inward and taking what we've learned in that follicular phase and starting to go, okay, what can we discard? What is no longer needed? And we can do this on deeper belief system like levels. And like typically it's that nesting period of time. It's a time in which your body perceives that it could be pregnant. And so you will go through the natural biological things that would be associated with that. So you might find yourself as a woman beginning to like tidy things up in your home more, or you want things a little bit more organized, or you really like come a bit more inward as you begin to like prepare for winter to come all over again.
Yeah.
And so progesterone takes the main stage during that period of time as it's being released from the ovary. And then you'll also have another like little bump mid-cycle of estrogen. And then if there's no fertilization that has occurred, then everything drops again and the grand orchestra happens all over.
Yeah. Wow. I love your connection to the seasons. I feel like that is such a good visual and feeling too, because I feel like the seasons, when we experience them or even think about them, it invokes like a feeling in us. Like when I think autumn or fall, I think like, oh, like beginning to draw in, and like I start craving cozy things, right, to prepare for winter, where it's like I want to be inside my house more. So I love that imagery there. And I'm curious, as what you were sharing about the kind of like activities or characteristics that kind of take place, like the things you might be drawn to, is that, like you said, tidying up the house or having ideas and like being really gung-ho about the things you want to do. Is that sort of like an unconscious just thing that happens throughout our cycle?
Yeah. It's an unconscious thing occurring in relationship with the hormone expression that's happening too. That's Nesia Nelson, who I did an interview with on my Instagram, and it's titled Progesterone, something about the hormone of the trust in life. But she named, and it was the first time that it really like clicked for me around that minerals, so our building blocks of life, impact our enzymatic processes, which impact our hormones, which impact our psychology.
Okay.
And so based off of that cascade, like you're right, it's happening on that subconscious level. And that's how wired we are to like existing as women too.
Wow. That's incredible. So would you say, I'm curious, right? So like if the main experience of our cycle is like detachment, and so maybe not necessarily being aware of these things, but coming into an awareness of it, maybe you could speak to yourself, but then also the women that you've worked with, like in your practice. What is that like? I know this is probably like a very broad question, but I'm just thinking of going from being disconnected to connected, and knowing there is an unconscious level, right, that we're experiencing through our hormones. How then do we transition to supporting ourselves through this cycle? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Took me a while to get there, but
No, it's great. It's a really slow process too, right? Like it's titrating that relationship, and it's turning from existing with your body to existing inside your body, which to me is the deeper experience that I really got to be catalyzed into over the last couple of years of like meeting God within yourself. And you named something really beautiful in the formation of the question too, is that we go from disassociation and disconnection to a level of detachment. And it's the ability, like at first the word is really misunderstood, I think, but it's actually who we are designed to be as women. And it's the ability to detach with love. And it's the deepening into the ability to like let go without grasping so hard, because like God can never put things into our hands if they're always like closed fists, right? And like clenched so tightly to like staying who we are. Because as women, we are designed to be an incredibly different human every single day. And that's the beauty of coming into relationship with how we were designed to exist within our menstrual cycle. Because a man moves through a 24-hour cycle. And the 24-hour energy cycle is really, really fascinating to study also from a circadian level. And a man will actually go through 2 energetic pushes, very similar to what we experience when you roll that out, that small 24-hour period of time out into a 28-day. But then we also like talk about concentric circle upon concentric circle, experience the 28 to 30-day cycle within, just like a man does within a 24 cycle, but it's its own version of it from where we are within the menstrual cycle. And so when we begin to like deepen into relationship, first and foremost, my suggestion is be really kind and compassionate to yourself. and just begin to like, how would you treat like a new friend that you were meeting?
Mm-hmm.
How do you begin to like build a relationship? And so beginning to allow yourself to like lean back in what it feels like to me, it's like you lean back into the hands of God as a woman and start to really awaken to like how you were designed to be, and just like slowly allow yourself to open up to the possibility that you're not going to be the same person that you are tomorrow.
Mm.
And for me, it really drops you into a presencing of what's here and now
Mm-hmm.
too, which is the detaching and letting go, which is what we get to do as moms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're not quite there yet, but you are though, in a sense that like you're nearly at the year mark,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're beginning to like have is he walking yet?
Almost.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's like you start detaching from no longer being needed to like hold him all the time.
Yeah.
Right now he's going to be more mobile.
Yeah.
And so we get initiated into what motherhood's going to be like the more that we become anchored into how we were designed to exist within our menstrual cycle.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. It paints a very woven picture. Like things are woven together. Wow. Yeah, with my son, just a little personal thing. I love the language around detachment, because I do recall like specific moments, right, when he is able to crawl, and I'm like, oh, like there's this morning of like you're growing, which is beautiful, but also you're not as little as you were, and intentionally, making space for letting go of who he was or what he was able to do, and then making space for who he is now and what he's able to do now. And like this almost like this, I don't know what it is, but just, yeah, like mourning, but also like excitement for what is to come, and being able to relate that to our cycle, I feel like it's very interesting. Very interesting. I would love to know, what is the benefit of being in tune with our cycle?
There's so many
benefits.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I know we've touched on it a few times as it begins to inform us around what else might be occurring inside of our body. I have so many women who come to me who are experiencing a whole onslaught of different symptoms. And one of the first questions that I ask them, because a lot of them have gone through the gamut with the Western, medical world in many different capacities. And I say, has anybody tested your hormones? And they're like, nope. And why that's important is because in the backdrop of what I talked us through and described that's happening in the 4 phases is that you have estrogen that is being detoxed throughout that entire process. And our livers control 2 detox pathways. And then our third detox pathway is through our digestive system. And so if you're experiencing some sort of like SIBO or gut dysbiosis or some kind of like gallbladder or liver thing, it's all going to be related to what's happening with your menstrual cycle. Like there's nothing in your body that happens in a silo. Everything is an orchestration of the total whole. And so coming into deeper relationship, and we touched on too, just very briefly, like the tracking of your basal body temperature in the mornings, understanding like the amount of spirit you have inside of you, because we don't measure cold. We measure the absence of heat. And so we are heat and light beings. And the more that we come into deeper relationship with that, we start to to be able to ask better questions of what is my body trying to tell me here? How can I best support myself today? What are my needs? How do I feel? Because so many of us can't actually name that. I couldn't for the longest time. I still struggle some with it. Like, to be asked that question is a big question, but we can't wait for the world to ask us that question. We have to be able to ask ourselves first.
Yeah. And being in tune, you've mentioned before, instead of, what was the phrase you used? Like existing with my body, but being in my body, like totally captures that. Yeah. Wow. So we've touched on this a little bit, but I would love to hear your perspective about this. Generally speaking, in our society, we've really gotten away from this wisdom and even honoring our cycle, right? I think you mentioned this in the beginning of our, like, the period kind of being like culturally seen as just this taboo thing, something you either shove away or it's shameful or dirty. And I can even remember as a kid growing up and seeing, I think it was like a scene in a TV show, but it was like they were in high school and this girl had a brown paper bag and she accidentally bumped into somebody and it fell on the ground and all of these pads came out and like everyone around her was like just ooh, and she got so embarrassed and swooped it all up and like ran away. And so that, in adolescence, right, painting this picture of this is embarrassing, right? Something that needs to be hidden. And so in our society, like that is the general climate around this, and gotten away from the honor aspect of honoring the cycle, honoring, even like the rite of passage of a period or rite of passage into not having one, into menopause. But how did that happen in your perspective? Like, how did we get here?
Such a good question. I haven't truly, I will say, like a lot of my studying of it is far more of the more recent years. I would be curious, and it does go back quite a ways, even to like the 1800s. And I'm just not sure, like from my own personal educational standpoint, where this all really, and does it originate from the original fall of man? Who knows?
Yeah.
But feminism definitely contributed in a huge way to this rise of like the independent woman. And I don't doubt though that like when the Industrial Revolution occurred also, and a lot more people like were being created to become workers. And we began to like, we fast track some over those years. Like you go through the Great Depression, you start to have like, families now living in very like singular places rather than in communal senses like we once were, that we begin to like pull the women out of the home more. We're no longer communicating like we once did in very like tribal senses. And so we begin to have this line of demarcation in society that creates that great divide of disconnection, because we started to create this like battle of the sexes too. And so we had a lot of women wanting to become like men. And so if you have women who are fighting to be like men, then they're going to want to like decrease more and more of who we are. And so though I can't pinpoint the exact moment within history of like where did we lose track precisely, outside of, I don't doubt that this is probably something that's been going on for eons in some way, shape, or form. And it's part of like, man's desire to control man, right? Like the more that we are disconnected, then living in that cycle of sin and shame and guilt, and it's easier to like to stay stuck and to stay bought into the way of the world. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it does.
It's a big one to ponder.
It is because I was listening to a conversation recently where it specifically had to do with like the history of birth and how it went from being like kind of a woman's circle, experience or event to a hospital in the hands of doctors and men. And, what they were talking about, they went back like very far in history of the norms within, communities or tribes. And then the maybe introduction of I always mess up this word, but colonization and separating, people from, so I'm getting off on a tangent, but basically it just being this long drawn out process, and of giving away our autonomy, into the hands of experts or other people
or pseudo experts.
Yeah.
As you were talking to, like, man's always hungered to play God, right? Like that's part of the original fall is that Eve wanted to know as much as God did, right? And so like we've experimented on one another as a way to try to play God and to understand God, right? Like if we take this back even to like, the Plato and everything and the original design of like math and geometry was to understand God. And so, we look at that and because man is man and not just like demonizing men, I mean like human, there is always a profit motive too that has existed in some way, shape, or form. And so it's a way it can easily become a system of control. Like you can't know more about your body. I've dissected all of these things. And we look at like the history of hysteria of women and how there was lobotomies done, like brain like surgery that was done to try to control women from no longer being hysterical. And so like there was always just this like, I mean, just experimentation upon experimentation of trying to control what was so out of our control. And just like we've discussed a few times, like it really is like smoke and mirrors. I'm sure at some point in time we'll make it to the other side. And I really look forward to that conversation where we get to understand on bigger levels, like what else is going on. Because we know a fraction of what's happening. Even what I explained already might actually not be true at all. And we're all going to make it to the other side and go like, can you believe that's what we thought was like going on? And I'm sure there's so many other things that have yet to be like truly, truly discovered. And, God's just waiting for the perfect time that we might be willing and ready to understand it all. But like we've discussed, there are deep histories like going back for so long of just humans trying to control other humans. And the female body is so unique too that like it's an easy thing to try to control because it's so obscure in many ways.
So interesting. How can we grow in psycholiteracy and implement it in our daily life?
Great question. great question. Where I always encourage women to begin is to get a thermometer and begin taking their basal body temperature, and begin also like observing their cervical mucus throughout their cycle and writing it down, putting like pen to paper and writing what they observe, what they how they feel, what they feel. Like the way I learned too was to actually insert your fingers and touch your cervix too, and like learn how it drops or like where it's placed or how it feels to touch, because it changes throughout your cycle. So you begin to actually develop like a hands-on experience, because so many women are really afraid of even touching their body too. Like that's a big experience. And so very slowly, just by doing those 3 simple observation tools and then beginning to understand the changes like within it, because you're just starting to look at just facts then and go like, oh, whoa, that's right. This is happening there. Or beginning to really like plot out how your basal body temperature is shifting and moving throughout your cycle, and beginning to just really like stand back and like observe what's happening.
It's so good. That's great tools that it's easy to do every day, right? I think about starting a rhythm when you wake up, and I remember this was something that we were doing when we were trying to conceive, was the basal body temperature, and I had a piece of paper on my nightstand and was doing that. But even now, it's like the invitation is beyond just for a goal, right? Trying to conceive, but the goal is to be within our bodies, but the invitation to not just do something for a goal, right? To conceive, but to be within our body and to know our body and ourselves. So I love those tools. I feel like those are super practical.
Yeah. You said something so brilliant though, too, around the no longer having, it's the deepening into the relationship of what fertility really is. Because we put away the goal of like, oh, it's something that I'll eventually get to. Right. And it's like how we're in relationship with one another, right? Like we can come into relationship with a goal of marriage, but there's so much more beyond marriage, right?
Yes.
Like you don't just like get married and then go like, cool, well,
we
this
did
is it.
Yeah.
Just like you don't just have a baby and then you're like, cool, that's it.
Yeah.
And the really beautiful thing when you start doing that all and building a relationship is now you have data and you have numbers that when something starts to feel off and you go into your doctor or whatever kind of practitioner you're working with and you're like, look at what I've been observing. And so when you have like blood work that comes back and they're like, well, everything's in normal range. And you're like, but why are my temperatures in the 96s? Like it becomes like going back to that to one of your questions around like, why is it important? And because you build a relationship that then you are able to speak up from a place of like deeper authority around, rather than it needing to just be to obtain something. It's like, no, this is how I exist fully as myself. This is how I can know when something doesn't feel right.
It's so powerful. So powerful. Like on this topic of fertility, you mentioned in the beginning of it's like how fertile, our body is, how not necessarily like fertile in the sense of the span of 12 hours, right, when you ovulate, but it being this encompassing part of our body. How does being in tune with our cycle play a role within fertility? and trying to conceive.
Yeah. Just like we talked about a few times, is that, or going back to what I had named around, we don't measure cold. We measure the absence of heat. And we are beings, like on a cellular level, what's happening are hopefully thermogenic equations, which are, the chemical processes that are giving off heat, and they're also giving off light. And so we begin to understand too what's occurring, like the deeper relationship that we have around observing all of the phases of the cycle, beginning to understand like where something might be off track or off kilter, tells us like how much longevity do I have? Like what kind of legacy am I able to create here and now, and then like to pass on to my children? Going back to what we had said around the endogenous stress experienced in the creation of life is equivalent to climbing Mount Everest. Like if you don't have energy and light and heat and spirit, then you're going to dim and dull out quicker. And you're not able to stand on like a firm, steady foundation of who you are as a woman. And that has cascades upon cascades of impact that will impact when we begin to approach, and how we approach what's now become hyper glamorized of perimenopause, and then how we will one day walk into menopause, and then one day walk into becoming Crohn's. And how do we meet motherhood, and how do we allow ourselves to evolve and change as women, and like support our body in all of the phases of what it means to go from menarche all like to motherhood to menopause. And it's just all of the full encompassing essence of woman that exists on that level.
My goodness. I love talking about this because I feel like our society has such a way of separating things, and what you're sharing is just this very integrative like way of just experience. Integrative experience.
Well, it's part of too, like you said it really beautifully too. It's like we like to disconnect. We like things to be in clean, tidy boxes, because if they're in clean, tidy boxes, then I can know it and control it. And being in this level of relationship with our body drops us into the mystery, where we're like no longer in trying to sit in the driver's seat and control. It's like we have a map, but then we are actually allowing God to guide our steps through it, because we can take our hands off the steering wheel and just go like, oh, that's right. I can be in my essence of woman, because I know where I am. I know how to support the season I'm in. And then I know how to build that legacy forward. It's like, then you're able to prepare, because to go back around the egg taking 90 to 100 days to maturate, anything you're experiencing today and anything I'm experiencing today is a gift from 3 months ago. And what you do today, how you nourish yourself today, how you take care of where you are in your cycle today is a gift to yourself 3 months into the future.
Wow.
And so, right, like, so we're watching this, like, truly like weaving upon weaving of like actual legacy that puts us in a more like energetic wealth mindset of how am I preparing myself to be a grandmother? How am I preparing myself right now to one day have a daughter who will be born with tons of eggs inside of her already too? And so it's like, it becomes this like much bigger conversation, more than just like getting what I want right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, I'm dropped into like really preparing for each season that I'm in and knowing what season I'm in so that I can meet the next season appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's so beautiful.
It's really cool.
It is. It really is. I feel like the last question I want to ask you, I think there's a good transition into this. But how can we honor these transitions? Like we were just speaking into, right, from, what was the word you used for the first one, before the menstrual, like we get our menstrual cycle?
Oh, menarche?
Yes, menarche. I've never heard that word before.
Yeah, that's the word for when a girl walks from like adolescence to womanhood and has her first menstrual cycle. It's
okay.
menarche.
Yeah. Okay. So the menarche, and then, maybe what could you say that again? That chain?
Yeah. It's described in a few different ways, but it's like menarche to, then you enter into like your maiden season, and then you walk into mother, and then you walk into perimenopause, and then menopause, and then you're like in the season of the crone, the wise woman.
I love that. It's so exciting when you think about it that way. But how can we honor these transitions within ourselves and the other women in our life? Because this was when I was thinking about it. One of my friends and I, we love to talk about like the idea of honor and like ritual of like as a woman, when I got my first period, I cannot remember specifically, but I know my mom did something special for me. But like, how do we honor these pivotal moments in our lives and the women around us in a society that generally doesn't, but wanting to flip that narrative, right? We're pursuing intentionality and knowing our bodies, and so yeah, how, in your perspective, your thoughts, like how do we honor that within ourselves and the women around us?
This is such a good question. It's a big question, and it's a good question. One of my teachers that I've learned from, Rochelle Garcia, she says because what's become really popular in the world are now these like your first bleed type parties, which are really beautiful and a great way to like celebrate. But truly, it's not just, it's like, how do we build support after the wedding too, right? Like, it's like, how do we really walk through these thresholds together? And to me, in my experience, it's continued community support and being willing to sit alongside one another, not in a hierarchy type of scenario, and learn and honor and give dignity and respect, but bringing women back together to really like have these conversations, the things that we don't really want to talk about. Similarly to what I was discussing about the older women that I had, been in conversation with, and they said that, none of their friends would sit and talk about it, but all of them had experienced these things. And so being willing to like hold one another accountable or honor that phase in where they are in their cycle. I have a lot of girlfriends where we just happen to know when the other one is like bleeding, and then it begins to make more sense too, of like, oh yeah, I can understand why you're feeling that way. And like beginning to discuss it more, to talk openly about it, of like, oh yeah, I'm full of ideas right now because I'm in my follicular phase, or, just really being willing to stand apart in that, in a society that like doesn't discuss that as part of the vernacular, right? Like it's not, it's like that bigger question of how do you become holy, like set apart and different. And it's really bringing that back into the center of our relationship as women first and foremost, because we're the ones that are going to do it. No one's going to do it for us. And so it's beginning to have bigger celebrations or ask more questions like, hey, are you tracking your basal body temperature? And when people start buying into the lies that we've been told about how our bodies have been created. And it's like being willing to stand apart in a world that's not quite doing it yet. And then just like bringing community back together and bringing women back together and like asking those questions of like what's going on and being willing to like stand and hold that with one another.
Yeah. It's so good. It's so beautiful. What a beautiful way to close out the conversation of, right, inviting ourselves to, like you said earlier, I loved what you said in the imagery of it, of just like leaning back into God's hand and the design, his design of us, and leaning into him and, you know, uncovering in the different stages our design. And with that too, like the invitation of partaking in community, which is such a part of the heartbeat of this podcast, is just to come alongside one another as women and talk about maybe topics or experiences or things that don't necessarily get talked about in our everyday life. And so I just want to thank you, Parris, so much for coming and for chatting and just sharing truly your wealth of knowledge and wisdom on this experience of our bodies as women, of our cycle. And for those of you who are listening, Parris has a wealth of just what she shares on her Instagram. What is your Instagram handle?
So I have the School of the Sacred.
Okay.
That's one of them. And then it's Parris with 5 underscores because I'm still anxiously awaiting for my husband to come find me.
That's wonderful. Oh my gosh. Well, we will share both of those here in the show notes, make them accessible for our listeners to go and see more, dive deeper. I feel like this was a great... I feel like you could dive so deep into all the different things that we touched on. And so I would just encourage you guys to go check out Parris, her Instagram. And even if there's anything that, you know, has intrigued you, or you're like, I want to see more of myself in this area or change in this area, or you offer one-on-one work.
Yeah, I offer one-on-one consults. I do also teach workshops around the cycle. There should be some fun little mini courses that'll be available for people later this year to do self-paced, like learning and education. But I really love the bringing together of the women to like share their own personal experience too. And there's something so incredible about when women come together. Like it humbles me. It humbles me every single time.
Yeah, that's so exciting. Yes, so be sure to check out Parris and all of her resources. And thank you for tuning in to today's episode. And again, Parris, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and just
Thank you. Thank you for having me.